Welcome to Bible Study 24H, the channel where we uncover hidden truths, share soul-stirring stories, and dive deep into moments of faith that change the world. In today's video, you'll hear the extraordinary story of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, the man who shook the Vatican with a historic announcement after discovering the painful truth about the global persecution of Christians. This isn't just a lesson in faith, it's a powerful reminder that we cannot stay silent in the face of injustice. If you find this message meaningful, don't forget to hit like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Bible Study 24H so you never miss another story that touches your heart and spirit. Are you ready? Let's begin this journey of discovery right now. To understand why Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle became such a bold and inspiring figure, we need to go back not just to his days as a cardinal, but to the very beginning where his story was shaped by family hardship and a deep-rooted faith that was tested long before he stepped onto the global stage. Luis Antonio Tagle was born on June 21, 1957 in Manila, the bustling capital of the Philippines. His family background was a blend of two rich heritages. His father was Tagalog Filipino and his mother was of Chinese descent. But more than the cultural mix, what defined the Tagle household was the resilience they showed in the face of hardship. The shadow of World War II loomed large over his family. His grandfather was gravely injured during wartime shelling, a wound that would force Tagle's grandmother to step up as the family's main breadwinner. She ran a small, humble eatery, working tirelessly to keep the family afloat. Around the dinner table, young Luis often heard stories of sacrifice, survival, and determination. These weren't just family anecdotes, they were life lessons. Reminders that faith was something you leaned on when times got tough, not just a ritual you followed on Sundays. Even as a child, Luis was sensitive to these stories. He saw how much his family depended on each other, how their trust in God gave them the strength to carry on even when resources were scarce. This early exposure to faith intertwined with hardship planted in him a seed, the belief that faith had to be lived out, not just spoken about. As he grew, Luis showed himself to be a brilliant student. His sharp intellect and natural curiosity set him apart. But unlike many of his peers who were drawn to careers in business, finance, or medicine, Luis felt a different kind of calling. He was drawn to the priesthood, a choice that, while admirable, was not the easiest or most practical in a developing country. But for Luis, the call was irresistible. He began his ecclesial studies at Ateneo de Manila University, a prestigious institution, and continued his formation at San Jose Seminary. His dedication and passion soon caught the attention of his mentors, who recognized that his gifts extended beyond pastoral sensitivity. He also had an incredible mind for theology. Determined to deepen his knowledge, Luis pursued advanced studies abroad, attending the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., there under the guidance of Professor Joseph Kamanchak, one of the leading theologians of the time. Tagle completed his doctoral dissertation on the theology of communion in the Church. His research explored how the Church as a community could truly embody the message of Christ, a topic that resonated deeply with his own experiences of family, community, and faith. Kamanchak would later describe Tagle as one of the most incisive and profound students I have ever taught. But perhaps what made Tagle truly exceptional was that he never let his academic success distance him from the people. When he returned to the Philippines, Tagle could easily have pursued a comfortable academic career, writing books or teaching in universities. Instead, he chose a path of service. He became the spiritual director at the Imus Diocesan Seminary and taught theology at Divine Word Seminary and San Carlos Seminary. But even these positions did not fully satisfy his pastoral heart. What drew him most was the opportunity to work directly with the poor, to visit the barrios, the impoverished neighborhoods of Cavite, where families struggled to survive. There among the dirt roads and crumbling homes, Tagle found his true ministry. He sat with families, shared their meals, listened to their stories, and offered not just prayers, but presence. A real tangible sense that the church was with them in their struggles and their hopes. He later reflected that it was in these humble communities that he truly learned the meaning of faith. Faith, he said, is not something you wear like a badge. It's something you carry in your heart, something that shapes your choices, your sacrifices, your way of living. These early pastoral experiences were more than just a training ground. They became the foundation of Tagle's lifelong approach to ministry. He came to believe that the church must be present among the smallest, the suffering, the forgotten. And importantly, he understood that compassion without action is hollow. Over time, his reputation grew, not just within the Philippines, but internationally. He became known as a theologian of depth, a pastor of the people, and a leader with both intellectual brilliance and a compassionate heart. This rare combination made him stand out in the global Catholic Church, a figure who could engage in theological debate but who also knew the names and faces of the poor. In many ways, Luis Antonio Tagle's journey up to this point was already remarkable. He had risen from modest beginnings to become one of the church's most admired voices, blending scholarship with service and intellect with empathy. But the story doesn't end there, because all of these experiences, his family's resilience, his scholarly formation, his pastoral immersion, were preparing him for a far greater challenge to confront not just local suffering, but the vast global reality of Christian persecution. A painful truth that would test not only his leadership, but also his very understanding of what it means to be a shepherd in today's world. As we move forward in this series, we'll explore how Tagle's early life became the foundation for the bold and historic announcement he would one day make a declaration that would shake the Vatican, redefine his legacy, and call the entire Catholic Church to action. As we continue the story of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, we move from the intimate scenes of his early life, the family meals, the dusty roads of Cavite, the classrooms where he shaped young minds, to a much larger, far more daunting stage, the global arena. Luis Antonio Tagle's rise within the Catholic Church was not accidental. His blend of theological brilliance and deep pastoral compassion made him stand out in a world where many leaders lean too heavily on either intellect or authority, but rarely both. By the time he was called to serve in prominent positions within the Vatican, Tagle had already earned a reputation as a man deeply grounded in the realities of the poor, someone who would never lose touch with the human stories behind the headlines. But nothing could have fully prepared him for what he would face when he stepped onto the world stage. At first, his mission seemed like an extension of what he had always done: to care, to listen, to accompany. But soon, the scope of what he encountered expanded beyond anything he had ever imagined. From the dusty roads of his native Philippines, Tagle now found himself visiting war-torn regions across the Middle East, sitting with persecuted Christians, listening to stories of unimaginable brutality and loss. In Syria, Iraq, Nigeria, Myanmar, and China, Christians were being hunted, driven from their homes, imprisoned or killed, not because of anything they had done, but simply because they believed. In the past, the Vatican had often relied on quiet diplomacy and cautious dialogue to address religious persecution. For many years, Tagle himself had believed in the power of dialogue, that by sitting at the table, by building relationships, by showing goodwill, progress could be made. And indeed, in some places, small steps were achieved. But over time, Tagle began to see a painful pattern. Dialogue, though noble, was failing in many of the world's most dangerous regions. While church leaders gathered in conference rooms, while reports were written and read, while appeals were made in diplomatic language, Christians on the ground were suffering brutally, relentlessly. Churches were being burned to the ground, children were being kidnapped, entire villages were wiped out. Tagle's travels opened his eyes to a grim truth. There was a gap between the Vatican's careful, measured responses and the urgent cries for help coming from the persecuted, and that gap was costing lives. He vividly recalled one trip where he met a Syrian mother who had lost her entire family for refusing to renounce her faith. Sitting with her, Tagle found himself unable to sleep for nights afterward. Her tears, her quiet grief, her simple yet profound courage haunted him. In private conversations with close aides, Tagle confessed his growing inner turmoil. He began to ask himself uncomfortable questions. Was he doing enough? Was the church doing enough? Was compassion alone sufficient without bold action? Could the church claim to be a global moral voice if it stayed silent in the face of such horror? These weren't just philosophical questions, they were personal reckonings. For a long time, Tagle had trusted that good intentions, dialogue, and prayers would eventually bear fruit. But the harsh realities he now faced forced him to confront a darker truth when one side is being crushed by violence. Peaceful dialogue can easily become a mask for inaction. Silence in such moments is no longer neutrality, it is complicity. It was during this period of intense soul-searching that Tagle began to shift. His close collaborators noticed it first. At international gatherings, the once lighthearted and optimistic cardinal began to speak less of hope and more of responsibility. His speeches grew sharper, his tone more urgent. He no longer spoke simply of building bridges, but of the moral imperative to defend the defenseless, even if it meant breaking away from diplomatic caution. The tipping point came during a closed-door Vatican meeting in late 2023. Surrounded by fellow cardinals, many of whom favored the traditional cautious approach. Tagle surprised everyone. He stood up and declared, "For the first time as a church, we must admit we have been too slow to respond. We need to do more than prayers, more than goodwill." It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Tagle, but for the entire Catholic Church. To be clear, this wasn't the first time the church had confronted the issue of persecution. But what made this moment historic was Tagle's growing realization that the usual methods, dialogue, reports, quiet diplomacy were no longer enough. He began to envision something bigger, something more comprehensive. A global initiative that would combine emergency aid, political advocacy, and grassroots action. Something that would tell persecuted Christians in no uncertain terms, "You are not forgotten." This vision would eventually become the foundation for what he called the Faith in Solidarity Initiative. But at this point in his journey, Tagle was still wrestling with the weight of responsibility. He knew the risks. Speaking out too forcefully could strain the Vatican's delicate relations with powerful nations like China or authoritarian regimes in the Middle East. It could lead to diplomatic backlash, even retaliation. There were senior figures within the church who warned him to be careful, to remember the bigger diplomatic picture, to avoid making waves. Yet for Tagle, the bigger picture had changed. He had seen too much. He had sat with too many grieving families. He had read too many reports soaked in blood. The cries of the persecuted had pierced his conscience, leaving him unable to return to the old ways of cautious diplomacy. He realized that as a shepherd, his duty was not just to maintain relationships or protect institutional interests, but to stand beside his suffering flock, even if it meant stepping into danger himself. It is often said that moments of transformation come not gradually but suddenly, in a flash of clarity, in a moment when the weight of accumulated experiences crystallizes into a single undeniable truth. For Tagle, that moment had come. His entire life, from the stories of sacrifice he heard at his family table, to the lessons of compassion he learned in the barrios of Cavite, to the intellectual formation he received in Washington, D.C. had prepared him for this reckoning. All along, his heart had been shaped to recognize one simple but profound reality: faith without action is empty. As we move into the next part of this series, we'll explore how Tagle took this personal reckoning and turned it into a bold history-making declaration, an announcement that would shake the Vatican, challenge the global Catholic Church, and inspire believers around the world to rise up in defense of the persecuted. As we continue the remarkable journey of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, we arrive at a pivotal turning point, the moment when private reckoning becomes public declaration, when inner turmoil transforms into bold history-making action. After months of wrestling with the painful realities of global Christian persecution, Tagle knew that staying silent was no longer an option. His heart, shaped by decades of pastoral care and grounded in theological conviction, urged him towards something larger, something braver. He realized that prayers, reports, and diplomatic conversations were no longer enough. They had to be matched by decisive, coordinated action. And so on February 14, 2024, at a special session held at the Vatican, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle stood before an audience of bishops, cardinals, NGO leaders, journalists, and faithful believers, and made an announcement that would shake the Catholic Church to its very core. With quiet determination, he introduced the world to the Faith in Solidarity initiative. The room fell silent as Tagle began to speak. Known for his gentle demeanor and ever-present smile, Tagle surprised many with the gravity and urgency in his voice. He did not open with diplomatic niceties or cautious words. Instead, he went straight to the point. Millions of Christians today live in constant fear simply because of their faith. He said, "We cannot continue to stand by. We must act." The announcement was brief, but its impact was immense. Tagle laid out three primary objectives for Faith in Solidarity, making it clear that this was not just another charity project or awareness campaign. It was a comprehensive global effort designed to change how the Church responded to persecution. First, the initiative would create a vast emergency aid network aimed at providing both material and psychological support to Christian communities under attack. This meant not only rebuilding churches, schools, and hospitals that had been destroyed, but also launching trauma recovery programs, offering counseling services, and creating safe havens for displaced believers. Second, the initiative would spearhead international lobbying efforts to push the issue of religious freedom back to the top of the global diplomatic agenda. Tagle specifically named forums like the United Nations, the G7, and the G20, where governments would be held accountable for human rights violations against believers. It was a daring move, signaling that the Catholic Church was ready to shift from quiet diplomacy to assertive advocacy. Third, Faith in Solidarity would launch a global media campaign aimed at raising public awareness about the crisis of religious persecution. Tagle emphasized that this was not merely a Catholic issue, it was a human issue, a wound to all of humanity. By mobilizing media outlets, social media platforms, and educational programs, the initiative aimed to break the global silence surrounding the plight of persecuted Christians. But perhaps the most striking part of Tagle's announcement was his rare public acknowledgement of the Church's past failures. In many instances, he admitted candidly, "Our silence has abetted violence." This was an extraordinary admission for a high-ranking cardinal, signaling a profound shift in the Vatican's approach. No more evasion, no more polite words. It was time for a proactive assumption of responsibility. Initial funding for Faith in Solidarity came from Caritas Internationalis, the Catholic Church's largest charitable network, along with major Catholic NGOs like Aid to the Church in Need. But Tagle made it clear that the true power of the initiative lay not in its financial backing, but in its philosophy of action. This is not just the task of the clergy, he declared. Every Catholic, from laypeople to cardinals, has the duty to stand up for those who cannot defend themselves. He wanted to break the long-standing passivity that had shaped the Church's global response, a passivity where believers would pray for persecuted Christians, but rarely take concrete action. Faith in Solidarity was designed to change that mindset, turning prayer into action and awareness into engagement. One key highlight of the initiative was its commitment to transparency and accountability. Tagle announced that all relief activities would be publicly reported through an online system independently monitored by international human rights organizations. This direct response to past criticisms about opaque church aid campaigns set a new standard for integrity and trust. Of course, such a bold move did not come without risks. Reporters at the press conference wasted no time asking tough questions. Would this initiative strain the Vatican's fragile relations with China or Middle Eastern governments? Was Tagle prepared for the diplomatic fallout? Tagle's answer was firm and unapologetic. No dialogue is meaningful if those who most need protection are abandoned. The announcement sent shockwaves across the Catholic world. Progressive Catholic organizations and human rights groups hailed it as one of the most important initiatives of the decade. Caritas Internationalis quickly pledged to reallocate budget priorities to support the project. Aid to the Church in Need called it a historic turning point. Yet, as expected, there were also negative reactions. Conservative cardinals in Europe and Latin America expressed concern that the initiative could escalate tensions between the Vatican and authoritarian regimes, potentially making life even harder for Christians on the ground. These concerns were not without merit. Diplomatic balance is delicate, and defending religious freedom inevitably risks displeasing governments that deny it. But for Tagle, the calculus had already shifted. Having endured his own internal crisis, having witnessed firsthand the heart-wrenching suffering of persecuted communities, Tagle understood that inaction was even more dangerous. For him, faith in solidarity was not just a relief program. It was a fundamental shift in how the Catholic Church saw its mission in the modern world. By making this announcement, Tagle was sending two powerful messages. First, to the persecuted. You're not forgotten. We stand with you. Second, to the entire Church. The time has come to choose to stand with the oppressed or to accept silence, and in doing so become complicit in injustice. This bold declaration instantly reshaped how Tagle was perceived within the Church. For years, many had seen him as the Asian Francis, a gentle dialogue-driven figure who shared the Pope's concern for the poor but lacked a distinctive leadership identity. With faith in solidarity, Tagle stepped out of that shadow. He emerged not as a passive heir, but as an independent leader, willing to take risks, confront powerful forces, and chart a new course for the Church. As we move into the next chapter of this story, we'll explore how this announcement impacted not only Tagle's personal journey, but also the broader dynamics of the Catholic Church, from the politics of the upcoming papal conclave to the global conversation about religious freedom. As we enter the final part of this remarkable story, we move beyond the moment of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle's historic announcement and begin to explore its deeper meaning, not just for him personally, but for the Catholic Church and the world at large. The Faith and Solidarity initiative was never intended to be just another church project. It was not a publicity move, nor a symbolic gesture. It was and still is a profound statement of identity, a declaration of what the Catholic Church truly stands for in the face of overwhelming injustice. For Tagle himself, the announcement marked a personal transformation. For years, he had been known as the Smiling Cardinal, a leader of extraordinary warmth and compassion, but one often perceived as cautious and gentle, especially in the political sphere. Some critics had even dismissed him as simply an extension of Pope Francis, a figure of continuity rather than bold innovation. But with faith in solidarity, all that changed. In one decisive move, Tagle shattered the image of the passive, dialogue-driven pastor and emerged as a leader with a clear, independent voice, someone unafraid to challenge oppressive regimes, to take risks on the international stage, and to place the defense of human dignity at the center of the Church's mission. This shift had immediate ripple effects. Within the Vatican, observers quickly noted that Tagle's bold stance significantly reshaped the dynamics of the upcoming papal conclave, the election where the next pope would be chosen. Until then, many had admired Tagle's charisma but doubted his toughness. Could he navigate the ruthless political world of the Vatican? Could he stand up to hostile governments? Could he make firm decisions under pressure? With faith in solidarity, Tagle demonstrated that he could. He showed not only that he possessed the moral clarity to see where action was needed, but also that he had the courage to lead even when that meant pushing against the inertia of the institution or facing diplomatic backlash. This immediately elevated his profile as a top contender to succeed Pope Francis, placing him in direct competition with heavyweight figures like Cardinal Peter Erdo of Hungary and Cardinal Matteo Zuppi of Italy. But more importantly, it reframed what kind of leadership the Church needed in this era, leadership that blended compassion with strength, dialogue with action, and hope with concrete results. Yet, as with all bold initiatives, faith in solidarity faced enormous challenges. On the ground, the targeted regions, Nigeria, Myanmar, China, North Korea, and parts of the Middle East, are some of the most dangerous and tightly controlled environments in the world. Delivering aid, providing psychological support, or advocating for human rights in these areas is not only logistically difficult, but often life-threatening. Humanitarian organizations are frequently monitored, harassed, or outright banned. Even with funding, even with political will, the implementation of the initiative remains an immense ongoing struggle. There are also internal challenges within the Church itself. While many progressive Catholics have hailed Tagle's initiative as a long overdue step toward moral accountability, conservative factions remain deeply wary. Some fear that a confrontational approach could backfire, worsening conditions for local Christians and destabilizing the Church's carefully maintained diplomatic relations. Others worry that such bold actions could further deepen ideological divisions within the Church, making it harder to maintain unity in an already polarized Catholic world. Tagle himself is not naive to these tensions. He understands that balancing moral clarity with diplomatic prudence is one of the hardest tasks of leadership. He knows that defending religious freedom is not simply about making a fiery speech or launching a media campaign. It is about building long-term networks, maintaining delicate alliances, and having the patience to work through slow, painstaking progress without losing heart. But what makes faith in solidarity so groundbreaking is that it refuses to allow these difficulties to become excuses for inaction. It is a declaration that, despite the obstacles, the Church must act, because to do nothing is to betray its most fundamental values. At its core, Tagle's message is simple but profound. The Catholic Church does not exist to preserve political standing, diplomatic ties, or institutional comfort. It exists to defend life, to preserve faith, and to bear witness to God's love, especially in places where darkness seems to have swallowed the light. This message resonates far beyond the walls of the Vatican. For persecuted Christian communities, faith in solidarity is a lifeline, a sign that they are not alone, that their cries have been heard, and that the global Church stands with them in their suffering. It is a reminder that their sacrifices are not invisible, that their faith is honored, and that they are part of a worldwide family bound together in Christ. For the broader Catholic world, the initiative is a wake-up call. It challenges believers everywhere to move beyond passive sympathy or comfortable piety and to engage actively with the pain of their brothers and sisters. It reminds laypeople, clergy, and cardinals alike that faith is not just a personal journey, but a communal responsibility, one that demands concrete action on behalf of the oppressed. And for Tagle himself, this moment represents the culmination of a lifelong journey. From his childhood in a humble Filipino family, where stories of wartime sacrifice shaped his early sense of compassion, to his years as a theology student in Washington, D.C., to his grassroots ministry among the poor in Cavite, and finally to the global stage of the Vatican, every chapter of his life has prepared him for this reckoning. He has seen the cost of silence. He has felt the weight of responsibility. And now, through faith in solidarity, he has chosen to lead not with empty words, but with decisive action. As we reflect on this journey, we are reminded of a fundamental truth. True faith does not shrink from the world's suffering. It enters into it, bears it, and transforms it. Through faith in solidarity, Tagle has lit a new flame of hope, not only for persecuted Christians, but for all those who still believe that justice and love have a chance to triumph in today's world.